and welcome to the Where People Meet podcast, the event technology podcast for the worldwide meetings and events industry. I'm your host, Mitch Malinsky, head of strategic partnerships here at Feedloop in beautiful Toronto, Canada. And today I am joined by RJ Crowder-Schaefer, head of event technology and product at Bloomberg. In his current role, RJ directs a global team of digital event technicians, QA specialists, product and project managers to oversee an event tech stack responsible for the execution of over 3,000 events annually. RJ is a subject matter expert on all things related to event technology, and he's regularly featured at events, podcasts, and webinars addressing the latest topics and trends pertaining to event technology. Now, it's clear RJ is a force to be reckoned with in the events industry. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to sit down and pick his brain on events and event technology. And there's going to be a lot of ground covered today with some incredible insights. So be sure, listeners, to have your pen and paper ready. This is sure to be a treat. RJ, thank you so much for joining us today. Where are you calling in from?
Thanks, Mitch. Great to be here. I am in Midtown Manhattan here in New York City.
Fantastic. Loving the backdrop.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as always, would love to get started today with you telling everyone a bit about yourself and your background in the meetings and events industry.
Sure. I really got into events a little over 10 years ago. Started out in the kind of live physical event production space. I was at an event space and studio down in Tribeca here in New York City, and kind of focused most of my work around New York Fashion Week and large kind of corporate build outs within a raw space.
Yep.
Really, for me, was the first time in my career that I kind of sat between kind of the non-technical and the technical, if that makes sense. So working with production companies, whether it's kind of stage build outs or AV production, and kind of liaising between them and business stakeholders who say, we want it to look a certain way, but not knowing necessarily how to make it look that way, which I really enjoyed. I felt like I was well positioned for that role and kind of really kind of grew into it. And, from there, I think we'll get into it, but kind of wanted something a bit more technical, and started to kind of poke around into the world of virtual events, digital events, and ended up landing here at Bloomberg and have been here for a number of years and have seen the virtual event program kind of grow from something that was quite small and very kind of a secondary thought, into something that is definitely obviously much larger now, and very much, the foremost thought going into event planning and execution.
Right on. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack today. There's a lot to dive into, but one item that stood out to me when I was doing some research for our interview is just the sheer scale of the events program for an organization like Bloomberg. Can you give the listeners a breakdown of Bloomberg's event strategy and what it takes from a staffing and resource perspective to put on so many major events in a given year?
Yeah, sure. And to be clear, my team is one part of the larger global events team. So The stats that you gave earlier, 3,000 plus events a year, by no means are we kind of driving all of those. But, moving into, COVID, we essentially were an events program that did about 3,000 in-person events a year, with anywhere from 400 to 500 virtual events. Overnight, almost pretty much in March of 2020, April 2020, that shifted from being 90% in person to 100% virtual, and obviously we kind of had to scramble to adjust there. But in that scramble, we can talk a bit more about that. Our structure largely remained the same from the event manager side, and I think that's a testament to the team, the global team itself, being kind of well positioned, well resourced, to be able to kind of manage not only the frequency and the volume, but also kind of urgent and, sometimes kind of world-changing events like we saw in 2020. That being said, the program overall is, like I mentioned, a global team. So we have event managers that are based in all of our major offices globally, as well as some of our kind of, let's say, secondary smaller offices as well. And the global events team sits within Bloomberg's marketing department and covers all of the event activity across the business. So really well positioned to kind of see the different needs of different industries, just because Bloomberg does cover so much. So thinking about, our larger kind of maybe core focus area in many ways on financial services, have a set of needs and kind of different trends that they're looking for from the events perspective versus something like Bloomberg Media, which might be targeting a different audience. And obviously, trying to sell and promote different products. And then kind of the third major group there would be, Bloomberg's corporate philanthropy side as well, targeting kind of the name brand of Bloomberg and the owner himself in many cases too. So that's kind of a very quick, scattered breakdown of the team. But I think the takeaways here really is that it is a larger team that's heavily focused on event managers. Yep. We do have which is the event technology and systems team, which manages the technical event execution for a large number of our events, as well as our event tech stack, vendor onboarding, making sure our vendors are, up to speed when it comes to security requirements and data management and all of that. As well as the Bloomberg terminal systems that we use to kind of initiate, set up, and execute our events from a data perspective, as well as the clients that are engaging with events on the Bloomberg terminal. Mm-hmm. And then the third group, the team overall, is our event experience and strategy team, which focuses on kind of like the larger picture ideas around user experience, attendee experience, some of the trends that might complement the event technology space as well.
Okay, so it seems as if there's really three pieces to the puzzle there. You've got the ground level event planners, the event staffing teams. You've got the high level strategists that are giving the overall vision for the events, the strategies that are going on throughout the various business units. And then comes in your team with the actual technical infrastructure, the resources to allow the strategists and event planners execute on that strategy. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly. And the part of the event technology team, a large part of it is the execution side of it, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But a chunk of that also is working with our stakeholders in the various business areas of Bloomberg, working with the event managers to understand what the ask is and trying to determine whether or not for a specific event, if that, based on those attributes, they can kind of fit into one of our current platforms. But also then if it can't, or if we're starting to see kind of a trend in certain areas, we'll start to look down and maybe think about kind of exploring those options within the industry to see what's out there and what we can implement. So very much execution focused. A large part of that, we can get into it if you like, around some of the hiccups that we saw kind of with that change from in-person to virtual in 2020 and early 2021. But also very much focused on what does our program look like in the next 6 to 12 months and beyond?
Right on. Yeah, there's a lot to get into today, but I do actually want to take a step back before we dive into how event tech is being used at Bloomberg, just to get a better understanding of you, because it's clear that you're passionate about event technology. You're passionate about it as a catalyst to help move the events industry forward. When did you develop this passion for technology, and why did you choose to make it a focal point of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall I kind of fell into it, to be honest. I thinking back to kind of my teenage years, I was always interested in, peeling back, the surface from a digital perspective, teaching myself basic HTML, fooling around with websites, trying to see if I can kind of recreate what others have done. That didn't get me too far, and I definitely didn't pursue kind of the dev route. But I think that there is definitely interest on my end that is really kind of seeing what someone's doing and understanding how they're doing it. Especially, or to complement that, I think someone having a problem or a challenge to solve and trying to work to find that solution is probably the driving force there. And I think technology is just a part of that, and one of the areas that I focus on. But I think very much in the digital event space, it's something that I consider me kind of falling into. One of those things where I felt like I was the right person at the right time for the role that I initially got here at Bloomberg. someone took a chance on me, and here I am. And the fact that I had that kind of curiosity about technology from kind of earlier in my life, I felt like that was something that really complemented and helped me kind of dig deeper into that role itself.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure you've seen this, but obviously me working for an event tech company, I love it. But it's a fascinating industry. It's very exciting because it's always innovating. It's always moving. If you're at a standstill, then other companies are going to be 2 steps ahead of you in no time. And that's the really exciting part about it, is that there's always new technologies. There's always new innovations to pilot out. And sometimes they'll crash and burn, they'll fail. But that's the fun part about this industry, is being able to go out and, as you mentioned, identify problems that need to be solved, and then figure out what tech solutions can fit that missing piece and help you and your team to overcome those issues. So, completely understand why you're so enamored with it.
Definitely, yep.
Yep. So you briefly touched on this earlier, but one item that I do want to drill down into further is that pivot from in-person to virtual overnight. Now, I know actually in 2019 to 2020, you did take a brief hiatus from Bloomberg. You were working with Meredith Corporation, helping to manage some of their product brands like People and Entertainment Weekly and Better Homes and Gardens. But it seems you were recruited back to Bloomberg in July of 2020, right after the pandemic hit, into your current role. And the first project you had on your plate was that transition, was, hey, RJ, we need to figure out how we're going to transition over 3,000 events from an in-person format to virtual. And it seems your team did this quite successfully. So can you highlight how your team was able to do this transition so successfully and in such a short period of time? That'll be the fun piece. If there are any challenges or failures that you were confronted with along the way, I'm sure the audience would love to hear about that too.
Yeah, sure. I think, I did leave Bloomberg for about 14 months, as you mentioned, and I found myself coming back to a role that previously, like I said before, kind of had was more of an afterthought when it came to kind of where it fit into the event lifecycle. Yeah. So, that was interesting in itself, and one of the reasons why I did choose to come back and fill this role. And I just want to be clear that the success of the kind of the conversion there and all of that is in large part due to the entire events program itself. Of course. I did come back to a program that was a bit kind of all over the place when it came to the technologies that we were using. The stack had grown larger, and throughout the years, before I left, especially working at a larger company like Bloomberg, you're always going to have things that crop up. This person in sales or this person on the other side might reach out to a platform directly and engage with them and kind of what I call go rogue. And part of the job that I have is understanding and kind of determining who's done that and why, and seeing if we can kind of get them into one of our current platforms. That was always an issue, or not necessarily an issue, not necessarily a bad thing, but always something it's always gonna be there at a company this size. When I came back to Bloomberg, it was kind of like that times 10 to an extent. A lot of the platforms that we had used or intended to use for something like an audio only with PowerPoint webinar were now being used to do video, plus 5 other things, and at 10 times the number of events that we were on before. So the first part was really understanding, okay, what are we using overall, and how are we using it? And kind of to complement that, what are the business stakeholders and what are the event managers trying to accomplish with these events? It's starting to kind of reorganize the stack in a sense. That was really phase 1. A later phase 2 was starting to kind of trim the stack to identify our core offerings. Because at a company like this, especially when we are heavily integrated or want to be heavily integrated with the Bloomberg terminal, that requires resources on the engineering side. And the more platforms we have, the more integrations that are needed, and the more resources that takes. So, those are probably the first 2 phases, I would say. A large part of that, maybe a phase 1 point, whatever, was working with our business stakeholders to understand that in the kind of the chaos of that transition, they may have used a platform that didn't live up to their expectations, and starting to kind of understand what the issue was, why it happened. And in most cases, it wasn't a technology issue. It was more of a human support issue, and one that we could easily solve if we had the right things, the right team in place. So part of that was kind of reshaping, reformatting the stack itself, and then doing a bit of a roadshow with our different stakeholders to understand what their issues were previously, what we've done to fix them, and start to kind of rebuild those relationships to make sure that they were confident in the team that we had put in place and the technologies that we were using to be able to execute their events accordingly.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about technology as a catalyst for change, as a means to come in and solve issues. But while it is a powerful conduit to move the industry forward and for event planning teams to pull off amazing experiences and meet their KPIs and business goals, I'm sure managing and implementing event technology for a company like Bloomberg comes with its own unique set of issues and challenges, especially when you're looking at things like scalability. So can you help our listeners understand the issues and challenges for global organizations like Bloomberg around the scalable use of technology?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of this. The first one is really just the number of users or end users that are consuming this technology from the company side, if that makes sense. So I should say maybe the number of stakeholders that are involved. Everyone kind of brings their own kind of thoughts on what the right platform is, and they saw they went to an event that was using this platform, I want to use that, versus what we're actually using. So kind of navigating the landscape of the number of overall users that might have a say or want to have a say in what's being used. Obviously, there's regional nuances that need to be accounted for. When it comes to the platforms we're using, accessibility, mainland China is one that I think comes to mind immediately, where we have to use a separate vendor to be able to achieve not only the access for attendees, but also certain components like a WeChat integration and so on. Right. And the third is really just the general idea that with a large organization, it takes a while to steer the ship, and that or to change course in a sense. So that requires patience when it comes to innovating new technologies or testing out new platforms. But also, I think I'd like to think at least more an emphasis on greater foresight into what's coming down the pipeline and getting ahead of some of the trends that could be something that we want to look at maybe a year or two out when possible, which is obviously not the case. But when my team members come to me and they say, "Hey, we want to use this technology," my first question is, okay, what's the value of it? And do we have anything that we're currently using that we can't leverage instead of this? Because those are the first two questions that I'm going to get from not only our internal security team to review this platform, but also our business stakeholders who want to know, why are you adding yet another platform to the stack? Or from our engineering resources of, do we need to integrate this? And this is going to take time and resources to actually do.
Yeah. And we've experienced that with a number of our major corporate clients, is just the nightmare that you have to go through for procurement and onboarding at some of these organizations. It's just one hoop you have to jump through after another. So it seems your team, you have a number of different event tech solutions already in place. You look to those before looking to outside solutions that aren't yet involved in your tech stack, at least for the majority of your events. I believe you mentioned that you are open to testing out and piloting new technologies, new platforms, but those would be done at a smaller scale before rolling those out to the broader planners and the broader organization itself.
No, absolutely. So we're, myself, the global virtual event program manager, and my event tech lead for APAC, we're constantly meeting with platforms, doing demos, seeing what's out there. And we have kind of a library of sorts of who we've met with, kind of what the platform's focus areas are, the attributes, all of that. We're constantly kind of out there looking at the different players in the space.
Yep.
For me specifically, though, there needs to be a true compelling reason, or kind of a direct focus on ROI, or a very specific event need for maybe one of our larger marquee events for us to kind of start to have that conversation. And it's, what I like to say is, like, it's I'm not saying no to a new platform, a new vendor, a new technology, for example. It's more of a why, I guess, or a deeper look into it. And the truth of it is that, for sometimes for us, onboarding a new platform is something that could take 6 to 12 months. So making sure that the desire there, the request there, is something that is, that the person requesting it is interested in leveraging it in the long run, not just for a one-off event because it might look cool or do a certain thing that way.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Now, before we move on from this topic around the issues and challenges of using technology at an organization like Bloomberg, you brought up a point that I do want to drill down deeper into, because I know it's something that a lot of the listeners to the podcast feel as well. And that is the challenge of dealing with different regions and markets and having varying demands from those regions and markets. So how can you appeal to different stakeholders in different parts of the world with varying regional requirements, but again, do so in a scalable manner?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, recognizing to those stakeholders that there are, of course, regional nuances that need to be accounted for. I'm based in New York. The Bloomberg is based in New York as well. I think a large part of what we do is kind of New York centric, But thinking about the team that I put in place, the focus was really having a team of event technicians and QA specialists to be able to support and execute events and have them based in each individual region, ideally with each of our major offices. And, that allows us not only to have that kind of real-time support in the regions, but for me, it also allows me to have kind of, a direct contact to what's going on the ground there, what they're looking at, what they're being asked to do, and why. And so I guess, my recommendation for this type of approach is trying to align as best you can, or formulate a baseline the best you can that applies to all three regions, the entire globe. Once you have that baseline, you can start to kind of iterate and find the nuances between each region and understand whether those are process changes that you need to account for. Maybe it's of course, like a certain language requirement for support, or if it needs a specific technology, like I mentioned before, for mainland China. But a large part of that is really having that communication across a global team to be able to, find commonalities and share learnings there, and then also pinpoint when the nuances for each region start to crop up and are unavoidable, which is definitely going to be the case. For me, this is, a lot of late night calls or really early morning calls. Oftentimes I wish I was based in the UK, because I feel like that's really like the sweet spot between the US and Asia. But it's been really rewarding for me to work across a global team and really kind of see all the different intricacies and needs, not only across different business industries, but also each region, and even countries within some of the larger regions as well.
Yep. That's some really good advice. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So before I let you leave, I would love to pick your brain on recent trends in the industry. I know you mentioned that part of your role is just staying on top of the latest technologies, the newest trends. And we have seen a lot over the past few years. Some have been fads that quickly fizzled out. Others are here to stay, like the rise of virtual events, which then led into the rise of the new and mysterious hybrid event format, now that events are getting back on site. So can you give us and the listeners your top trends, technologies that are coming out right now that we should all be aware of and that we should all be looking to?
Yeah, I'm going to punt this one a little bit.
Okay.
Not entirely, though. I think I'd be curious how many of your listeners would raise their hand to, did you run any hybrid events or were you part of any hybrid events before, the COVID-19 pandemic? I definitely was on a much smaller scale. And
Yep.
I always find it interesting that within kind of our business stakeholders and some of our event managers, this word hybrid seems to reference something super complex that is going to cost a ton of money and take a ton of time to scope out. And that wasn't always the case previously. And obviously there's levels of hybrid, right? You have your simpler ones, maybe an add-on virtual stream to an in-person event that's focused on the in-person audience, all the way up to something that might engage both in-person and virtual audiences, so on and so forth. But I'm curious, just something that I've noticed is this idea of hybrid just being so complex, which, I think we all know isn't always the case.
Yeah.
When it comes to trends, though, our focus here is really leveraging technologies that we're already all aware of and understanding where they can better fit within the tech stack. A part of kind of the ongoing conversations that we have with our primary platforms that we use for our events is kind of no longer accepting, or at least not as accepting as I was pre-COVID of here's the platform, these are the features, this is what you get. To me, it's no, these are the features, this is what you get, but we also need X, Y, and Z. And we would like to work with you and your product team to help push for that. And I think a part of that is integrating some of these technologies like VR and AR into the platforms to understand what is a feasible, scalable way to include these technologies into our events.
Okay.
That's a tricky one, I think. A large part of what we see in the AR VR space is, what I would call kind of like very kind of cartoony or a little bit more of like a video game type look and feel, which does for a large number of our events, especially in the financial services space. So, to kind of keep this succinct, I would say AR VR is very interesting to me, generally speaking, to see kind of where it moves in the next 6+ months, especially when things like the Oculus headset is now a bit more reasonably priced, $300. Doesn't need to be connected to an operating system any longer. From kind of a hardware perspective, as well as some of the areas around kind of what I would view as like opportunities in breakout spaces. Something like what Meta released recently, which is a VR kind of business meeting space where you can kind of sit at a desk and see your keyboard and see your screen and also see your fellow meeting attendees in this VR space. That to me doesn't necessarily work too well, I think, for main stage scenarios, but I think something like breakout spaces is a direct application that we could look at. And then I think for me, also on the video production side, leveraging kind of platforms like Unity to really enhance production value. I think that the emphasis on content is 50% of the picture, but one that should not be forgotten or foregone based on a focus on the user experience of the product side. So I don't know. I'm not going to give you any specifics besides those, I think, right now. We'll wait and see what happens. And I guess the last point I'll say is, over the past few weeks, we're starting to see kind of with the other economic trends within the world right now overall, some of the event technology companies, some of the platforms that grew during the pandemic start to downsize a bit and start to refocus their approach and kind of what they're going to be primarily focused on. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. I think that, we could talk about this all day long. I could ramble on forever, but I'm curious to see kind of where virtual lands after the dust settles in the next couple months and into 2023. A large part of what I think event managers and event technicians and those leading event programs overall that know the value of virtual and know the value of the hybrid event, it's really on us to kind of prove that value to the business and to prove that there is value beyond just shaking hands with someone in person. There's value in that too. Don't get me wrong, absolutely. But the reach and the potentials on ROI for the digital component to hybrid events or virtual events themselves, I think, is something that is going to have to be fought for to prove, in a sense. I don't think it'll be that hard to prove, but we're gonna have to go out of our way to really kind of drive that home.
I completely agree. And I think it is about getting creative. An example of this is The virtual format, we still have a lot of faith in it. But what we're seeing is a lot of our clients aren't running a typical conference virtually as they would in person. Like if you take your typical 3-day annual conference in person, the attendees register ahead of time. They show up on site for days 1, 2, and 3, and that's the end of the event. But what we are seeing our clients do is in a virtual format, they extend that. So yeah, you may have your typical 3 live days, but the virtual platform lives on beyond the event. And I think that's where it comes and brings the idea of, hey, how can we turn this event into more of a year-round community where there's constant engagement, where people can log in whenever they want and they can watch pre-recorded content on demand. You may be hosting live sessions every week or every month. There are networking boards, there are discussion boards where you can post questions, you can post problems you're having, and then other people in that community can tag along and add comments and add their own input. So I completely agree with you. Virtual is here to stay, but it's going to require getting creative. And as you said, really fighting and selling that value proposition, both internally, but also externally to those end users, those registrants, those sponsors, because there's a lot of options out there right now. There's a lot of events, be it in person or virtual, and they can and should be selective with where they spend their time and money.
Yeah, and I think, to your point there, that specific example requires, input and guidance and work on other aspects of, let's say, a marketing team to be able to develop the content plan and really the schedule. And whenever someone comes to me and says, hey, we want to create this environment, it's going to be, something that we maintain and update for X number of months or years, whatever it is, my first warning to them is that takes a lot of work. Not that it's not possible, absolutely is, but I think that it really takes a lot of work across kind of all components of marketing, not just the event side of things. Yep. But I think that the event tech industry and some of the platforms that we're seeing out there right now, they're really well positioned to allow that type of setup to be done, and to be done without 4 months of lead time. And something that allows those select individuals on the team to be able to update themselves as they see fit. But I think the level of effort and the input required across all of marketing and the various users there shouldn't be ignored when it comes to some of those larger programs to develop.
Absolutely. Well, RJ, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've gotten a lot of value out of it. I know the listeners are. But before we wrap this up, we always like to get some tips and tricks that the audience can action on right away. So if you had to give one piece of advice to the listeners of the podcast on how they can make the most out of their organization's tech stack, what would you tell them?
That's a good question. I think I'll give you something practical here, and one that really helped me when I came back to the company and was trying to kind of really think through, our tech stack and where we were at. I kind of put together 2 buckets. One was back end and one was front end. And I started to take all the different technologies we were using, whether it was a virtual event platform or a data collection or database vendor, third-party polling solution, whatever it was. And I started to put them into each individual kind of column, depending on where they fell in the event lifecycle and kind of who interacted with them. And doing that allowed me to really take a step back and start to then outline where, which platform was being used along every step of the way. And through that exercise, I uncovered and kind of realized that I had forgotten this platform or this technology or this or that. So, I mean, that's probably, if you're just kind of starting to think about the idea of an event tech stack overall, that would be a good exercise there. And just to be clear, backend, would be kind of your backend content management solution. Any type of kind of database or data warehouse are using to store content, anything that your internal team might be using to kind of create, execute, engage with attendees, versus the front end, which would be kind of your web-based, your attendee-facing, login page, virtual event platform, email communication so on and so forth. But that kind of split, I feel like, is a really nice way of thinking about it. And then from there, you can start to really build out the tech stack itself in a visual way.
That's great advice. Love it. Well, I know you do put out a lot of content, and you are a thought leader in the industry. So for the listeners who want to follow along with you and stay connected, where is the best place for them to do so?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn works. Feel free to search for my name and connect with me, and I'd be happy to chat with anyone that reaches out and maybe talk through some issues that they're having and provide any advice that I can.
Awesome. Well, we'll get that added to the show notes. But before we wrap up today, any final words, RJ?
No, thanks for having me, Mitch. This is great. I love talking about event technology. I love kind of geeking out about it. And have me back anytime.
Amazing. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. This was a really great conversation. And to our listeners, as always, thank you. This wraps up our Where People Meet podcast episode on the state of event technology with RJ Crowder-Schaefer. Thanks for your time today, and we will see you next time on the Where People Meet podcast.